Welcome back to season 3 of The Intended Parent, our podcast all about surrogacy, and the first one on video. We're kicking off today just chatting about what we've been doing for the last 2 years and also what we have in store for you. I hope you enjoy.
Hi guys, how is everyone?
Hello.
How are you, Fran?
I'm good, yeah. I'm looking out the window and there's black clouds and it's, first day of August today? So,
I know.
yeah, that's a little bit depressing, but other than that,
I know. I read an article that said it was the hottest July on record, and I know we had a really warm beginning to the month, but honestly,
it hasn't
very
felt
British
like
problems.
Summer. Hasn't felt like summer yet. It's coming.
Yeah, but we, before we jumped on, we did have a little look at our podcast recordings, and it's pretty much 2 years to the day since we released our last episode, which feels slightly bonkers.
Yeah, it didn't. I don't think we meant to leave it that long, did we?
I don't think we did, but I think that's just, hopefully our listeners realise that we're quite real people and, the mum struggle is very real as well. And we're just going to be honest that, I said it to a friend recently that I read a quote that said something like, the days are long, but the years are short. And during school holidays, those days seem extra long.
Especially when it's raining.
Yes, but the years since sort of starting out in this surrogacy world, they've just flown by.
Yeah,
absolutely
Evelyn was 7.
Yeah.
Evelyn was 7, and I just think, where was that gone?
I remember when Gina was pregnant with her, because I think I messaged you because Gina was the first. Gina, who is your surrogate, was the first person I met in this community, and the first time I met her, she was about 7 months pregnant with Evelyn.
No, it's mental.
And yeah, but also that gave me such hope, seeing her pregnant with your child. And I thought, God, I remember thinking, God, what a lucky woman Fran is. I didn't know you at the time, thinking she's that many steps ahead of me on this journey, and her miracle baby's growing in someone's tummy, and I thought it was unachievable. I really did, until I met Gina. I thought I could never do this. But yeah, that was one of those moments in time that changed the rest of my life, I think.
Which is another reason why these stories are so important, putting these stories out there, which is, I think, what gives us all that passion and that drive to just keep on going. And that's what season 3 has been 2 years in the making. We've been talking about it for 2 years, and we've just been talking about the need for more stories. People still, surrogacy is on the rise, but people need these stories. They need to be able to relate to somebody who is like them, and see themselves in that position. So I'm really excited about this season because we've got more stories lined up from a much more diverse range.
We have,
of people.
I mean, we've learned
that hopefully people can say that oh, look, there's me.
Yeah. I feel like, without spoiling too much of what's to come on this season, like we've sort of learned so much ourselves, even though we're so informed. So it's been really lovely. But yeah, so the last 2 years for me, we digress, have really been spent raising the family. The triplets were born in 2020. We got one season out, and then I think I was full into being a multiple mama. I had 4 kids under 4 for a very long time, and it felt really complex, I think is the best way to put it, because we all know how grateful we are to become parents through surrogacy. I don't think anyone takes it for granted, particularly when you've sort of walked the paths that we've walked that have been like laden with adversity before our children sort of come into this world. There's no taking it for granted, but equally every now and again, grief raises its head. Someone just has to say something, and that your triggers are still there. And I think just frustration, of being a parent. It's really such a tricky job when we're trying to hold down so many other things in the home. That it's been complex.
Do you know, I was listening to somebody the other day, and there's a book, and my menopause brain has forgotten that, but it was all about being able to separate joy and fun of parenthood, and how actually sometimes we can't necessarily vocalize the difference between those things. So often when people describe being a parent to somebody who hasn't yet had children, they describe it in a way that makes it sound fun. rather than the fact that actually a lot of the time it's not fun, but that doesn't mean that you're not joyful. And the difference between those two things. And I just felt
interesting.
That was so interesting because, you know, you step back on one of those long days and your heart is full of joy, but you haven't had that much fun.
Lovely way.
And I thought that was such a perfect way of putting it. And it allows you to then have those two things separated. And it allows you to then be joyful and experience that joy of having a family, but also be feeling, do you know what, I'm not having that much fun at the moment.
And I think that's really so important to acknowledge, because the early years, I mean, I guess my kids make me laugh every single day, and there's something I'm grateful for every single day. But equally, on most days, something will happen that will take me back to a dark place. And, you know, on our episode that we do have coming up with Julianne, a wonderful counsellor, you know, we were both really triggered by certain conversations. And one of the things that we always say to anyone embarking on a surrogacy journey is that you have to be prepared for the mental pressure that this brings, sort of thing. Like I just think I've never got away from, you know, a pregnancy announcement being a trigger. It still is a bump. I just see a baby bump and I just want to cry, because I still want that. I've never had that. I have my children, but I still don't have, you know, certain things that I spent my whole life thinking I would have. And that's okay. Like, it's okay to have that gratitude and grief coexisting, because
I mean, I feel the same with, you know, we've got the two girls. And it was, you know, really funny because recently they you know, they've been talking about babies and having potentially a baby brother or a baby sister. And Gina recently finished a surrogacy pregnancy for somebody else. And, you know, with the girls talking about that, there's, you know, I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't a part of me that was just thinking, yeah, it would be lovely to have another one. And I wish that I could do that myself. You know, we wouldn't have stopped at 2 if... and again, it's that coexisting, because I understand we are in a really lucky position in 2 ways to have gone through 2 surrogacy journeys. But I still have that part of me that feels like we're not... You know, I'd like our family to have been bigger.
Yeah, it's so funny, isn't it? Because we probably would never have gone for 4, yet we ended up with 4, and you probably would have gone for more. I probably would have stopped at 2. You just never know which way this is going to play out, and, you know, I guess uncertainty really is the only certainty when you're going through like fertility journeys. But, you know, I talk about triggers, and one of the things I've really noticed is that probably only in the last 10 months, I've started going out with the boys on my own. We sort of couldn't manage it before they were sort of 2.5. It was really tricky to do. But now I sort of will go out and I'll take them on a walk and I'll take them in the buggy, and I'm always stopped. Every single time I go out, I'm stopped. And it's either because they're triplets and they obviously, you know, there's so much focus and attention on triplets, or someone will stop me and they'll start a conversation and then they'll say, "Are they yours?" And I find that so difficult to answer, because not because I have any doubt in my mind that they're mine, but I never know how much of my story to share in a, you know, in the middle of Tesco's, or, you know, walking down the park and one of them's about to go and chase a squirrel, and I'm trying to explain to this person that yes, they are mine, but they look different to me because
it's like one of those questions, you know, when people say, "How are you?" And they don't really want to know, do they? Because actually, how are you? Oh, really? You want to know how I am?
Yeah, exactly.
Have you got all week?
Exactly, and that's exactly what I start to share. And I say to someone, "Well, it's, you know, it's a long story. How long have you got?" I lost my fertility to cancer. I couldn't have my own children, you know. And then if I've got a Marla, they will always look at her and say, "Yep, she's yours. What about the other 3?" And I'll say they're all mine. But I had to go on a donor conception journey because I, you know, lost the ability to have children that are genetically related to me because of X, Y, and Z. And sometimes their faces are a bit like, "Whoa, I did not expect that response. You know, I expected you just to turn around and say you're a childminder, or I expected you just to turn around and say, you know, 2 are yours and 2 are your sisters." But I feel like I can't It's really weird because Becky over at Defining Mum, I get a lot of advice from her on the donor conception space, and she says you don't always have to tell people your story. It's yours, and you can walk away and just sort of nod politely and walk away. But a part of me wants to always see that opportunity as an opportunity to educate.
Yeah.
And so if someone asks me the question, I think, well, I'll tell you, because more people need to stop asking that question, because more people need to understand that families are built in so many different ways. And actually those questions are very triggering. I haven't quite worked it out. I haven't quite worked out when I say something, when I don't say something, but it's been really complicated. And, that loss of genetic link, it does still play on my mind. I do often think, because Amala looks so much like her dad as well, even though she is sort of genetically mine. I do sometimes think, what if I had a little girl who looked exactly like me? Or, what if I had a little boy and he, I don't know, just shared something of my physical being. It's really weird. And then sometimes if the triplets absolutely drive me mad, which is about 50 times a day, and I get really cross with them, and then I go back to, well, I didn't used to shout at Amala like this. Is that because they're not genetically mine?
No,
or
it's
is it
because
just
you've got
because
4 children.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is exactly
and
that.
You're trying to do a million.
But it doesn't stop the question from continuously popping up into your mind. And so it's definitely something I'm continuing to work through. So a lot of the last 2 years has just been like getting my head out of this messy space of raising this blended family. But thankfully we've got a really beautiful community, and in Julianne, who we have an episode with coming up, I think people will really resonate with her messaging. And in Becky over at Defining Mum, anyone who's on a donor conception journey, whether it's through TS surrogacy or egg donation of any sort in a GS journey, I think they'd get so much help in terms of coming to terms with that. So,
and you also left your job as an accountant.
I did. Yes, it feels like a lifetime ago. Just 20 years of studying towards that. But I left that. I always used to see stories of people saying like, I've left my job, and I was thinking, oh my god, I could never do that. I would have to go back into accountancy, but I did, and it's been life changing. I focused a lot on the intended parent, and we've got this podcast coming out, we've got some other projects that we'll talk about later, but I've also been penning my very first book, which has been on my vision board for years. Very exciting. So a lot of the focus of that book is about being a South Asian woman who's had to go through adversity, sharing my story of cancer and heart failure and infertility, and equipping people with the tools of coming out the other side. So that's been really lovely to have that creative process. But it's also a bit of a user guide, whether you're a person of colour or not. It's just how can you really sort of overcome your trauma and thrive on the other side of it, because hopefully my story and your story it's one of hope, and one that helps people sort of navigate the roadblocks that might come their way. I've also set up another sort of not-for-profit organization in the breast cancer space, so that is exciting. People of colour are so poorly represented, especially when it comes to media campaigns, data, clinical trials. There isn't enough diversity in there, so working super hard to make sure that people of colour are seen and heard and recognised in all spaces, because we really do need equity in the system if we're going to deliver the right healthcare services and sort of fertility services as well. So that's been super interesting. And then so this leaving my job was a big thing. It was really scary. A few people said, well, you've got 4 kids, you'll never go back. And I was like, no, I will, because it was my security blanket. It really was. But I do find that in setting up the businesses, I've probably used a lot of my finance skills, particularly when we're talking about the intended parent, and we're always talking about money. The first series of the podcast, we talk heavily about the cost of surrogacy and how expensive it is, and
it's only got more expensive as well. I mean, since we first started talking about it.
Exactly. We're living in this sort of cost of living crisis, and that means that surrogacy expenses go up, and agency fees are slightly higher than they were at the time. And all of these routes, IVF clinic fees are higher.
Yeah.
If you're going overseas internationally, airfare is higher. Like, there's so much to think about when it comes to finances. And that's why sort of, I guess, we wanted to curate an offering for our community, which we have done through some online courses that we'll talk about in a little while. But
it's just another route, isn't it? I think that's what's been really nice as well, talking to when we talked to Natalie from Brilliant Beginnings. It's really nice to sort of have that community and have that support from somebody who says, yeah, do you know what, then there needs to be these alternate routes, because we just want to create more pathways for people to actually take this journey, rather than closing it down and saying, do you know what, this is only for people who who've got the money to do it.
And I think that we went to the fertility show this year, which was another sort of big milestone for us. It was brilliant to be able to go out and talk to people who haven't yet found their way to their miracles. And I definitely found that in those conversations, not everyone wants to go it alone, using just the Facebook community. A lot of people aren't on social media, so they didn't even know to find the community.
Yeah, that was the most surprising thing for me, from how many people we spoke to at the fertility show weren't on social media. I think as well, it's like, especially because my sort of part of the job that I do now is so heavily involved in social media. It's really then really strange when you then think of that fact that there are still a lot of people out there who aren't, and how we need to get that message then across to those people about what we're doing
in an affordable way. And I think we've always focused on making sure things are affordable, which is why the podcast and all the information we gave was always free. And now I guess the courses are very reasonably priced to give people everything they need to navigate an independent journey on their own. And to me, that was super important, that, independent surrogacy doesn't get left behind anywhere. But we also provide people with a whole of market review, so that they know if independent surrogacy is right for them, or if they need to save up to join an agency, but then create the pathway that works for them. So I guess it has been a really busy 2 years with changes in jobs and setting up businesses and raising families and dealing with trauma. It's no surprise that 2 years have flown past. But I guess 1 year we've really focused on curating the offerings that we want in the world of surrogacy.
I think giving people that face-to-face is so important, because there are, you can listen to our podcasts, you can, if you're on social media, you can go onto these Facebook groups. But we've talked about in the past how sometimes when you're writing things online and you don't actually see someone's face, that things can be misconstrued. People don't necessarily always have the confidence to do that. And so it's always been like, well, you can have this information for free if you go out there and get it yourself. Or you end up paying quite a lot of money going to the agencies. So it's really nice to put something out there that says, no, you can have face to face. You can talk to us. You can talk to people who've been there, done that.
But this sort of bridges the gap. Hopefully.
Bridges that gap and just gives that other route.
And I think it's really important that that the thing you say there about the written word being misconstrued, because I know when we came back from the fertility show, someone had messaged into our group about not wanting to share that they were going through a surrogacy journey, and someone took that quite negatively. But this is where I guess I sort of come in here with sort of my cultural hat on as well as a person of colour, because I know how difficult a surrogacy journey is for minority communities, and how acceptance isn't always there for this path, and hopefully in our face-to-face courses, we would always be able to explain why someone finds it difficult to talk about their journey, and our personal experience means that we can bring, a deeper conversation to the fore, versus sort of the very sort of surface layer conversations that happen on social media, where you don't know someone intimately enough to sort of understand why the question has been posed in the way it has. So
exactly.
I mean, it's been brilliant. How's it been for you?
So again, just big changes here. I dropped another day at work. It went from at one point I was giving up teaching completely. And then in the end, again, financial crisis and all of that meant I'm doing 2 days now. But it's been a really nice balance, because I've been able to do that, but also juggle that with setting up this next step of the intended parent, learned some new skills, website design.
Which you're very good at.
Graphic designer, that A in GCSE graphic design came in useful. But I've done a lot more DIY as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it's been a bit of a whirlwind. We finally got the girls christened, which I know I spoke about over the last time, I think, last time in the podcast. And the reason I bring it up is, again, because just to talk about how Gina and Ian, who is our surrogate and surrogate's husband, are the girls' godparents now. And that was just so unexpected. In terms of what we went into the relationship expecting and thinking that it would be. And for us, that has continued to be that, they are just an extended part of our family now. The girls love them to bits. We love them to bits.
It's so lovely to see. And I'm not even going to lie, sometimes I feel quite envious because whilst I adore my surrogates and, I'm sure they have equal affection towards us, distance sometimes means we don't see each other as frequently. And I didn't even think of that when we matched. It was always about the match, and life gets busy and stuff. But I do see how close you are with with Gina and Ian, and think, God, it would be lovely if my children had that relationship with their surrogate. And I actually went into surrogate thinking I thought I would never want anything more to do with my surrogates when I first entered this, this space. Now I want more to do with them.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's why it's so important. I saw again a conversation on some of the Facebook groups recently, and it was talking about how somebody, what happens if I want this type of relationship, but is that a relationship that other people are going to, like a surrogate would want? And again, there was a lot of people saying things like, why would a surrogate want a relationship like that when they've done this and this and this? And then it was really interesting to then hear some surrogates going, well, actually, do you know what? I've been a surrogate 11 times. I can't have that relationship with every single one of the families because that's just impossible. Yeah. And I think that's something that's really key is to not necessarily project the relationship that you would want on somebody else. Everybody is different. Everybody's going to want it. And also how relationships can change and what you go into that match thinking might not necessarily be how it turns out in the end. And that's just sometimes life, that happens. The same time as when people get married, people don't go into a marriage thinking, we're going to get divorced in 5 years' time. Yeah. But equally things change, and I think so. Again, it's all about that communication, keeping that open. But
and sometimes it's like with all best intent as well, isn't it? Like, I know I always want to meet my best friend. I'm like, oh yeah, we'll do a dinner. We don't do it for like 8 months because we don't get diaries to coordinate or whatever. So there's just needs to be, a bit of acceptance that whilst you have an expectation of a relationship to go a certain way, it might not always, it might not always materialize because because someone just doesn't want it, or B, because life gets in the way a little bit, and I feel like I probably have to bridge the gap and tell the story a bit more with my children because they don't see Laura and Ina as much, so I talk about them and look at photos of them, whereas with your girls, because they're seeing Gina and Ian more, it's just naturally their journey's naturally infiltrating into
And it's so nice as well to be I was brought in again to the school this year with the teacher. At one point I was thinking, oh God, what's she done? Can you come in and have a talk to us, but without any sort of hint of what it might be about. And it was it was nice to go in and just, I think they'd been talking about again babies and things, and it was nice to go in there and be able to share that story. Evelyn, she's now 7. She can tell you most of the story, but there were still a few details, some questions that the other children had in the class that she wasn't able to answer. I think at one point someone said, does that mean you're adopted then? And she was like, oh, I don't know. So it was nice to go in and speak to the teachers and be able to give them that information as well. But it just goes to show, again, how much educating is needed. And I think that's why one of the things that I loved about being at the fertility show, and I'm really excited about putting these courses together, that is my background. That's teaching, and being able to educate is what I've done for the last 20 years. In the physics classroom, it's sort of lost its shine a little bit. I think it's what's really nice is educating and empowering people who really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I don't always get that with physics. Newton's law, I finally understand it. I don't quite get those moments, but it was to be at the fertility show and talk to those people and really feel like, do you know what, I've made a difference. This is going to really have an impact now potentially on what you go on to do. I think that was really empowering for me, and made me feel amazing as well.
It was so mirrored, wasn't it? I think neither of us expected to talk as much as we did at the show. I honestly thought we'd be one of the quietest stands.
We didn't stop.
We ended up being the last stand standing on both days. But it just goes to show as well, because I would say 90% of people who came to us didn't know about independent surrogacy. And I think is the whole reason why we keep showing up again and again in this space, because we have 6 children between us, all born through independent surrogacy, and there needs to be something a bit more structured. That means that independent surrogacy gets the credit it deserves, because you hear too often that independent's too risky, when the reality is that it's no more risky than any other choice.
Well, I mean, like we all say, independent through a clinic. We've always said we don't necessarily advocate the home inseminations and that sort of thing. Whether you're doing TS, traditional surrogacy, or gestational surrogacy, we would always advocate going through a clinic, which then means that you've got those boxes ticked, you've got the DBS check, you've got the blood tests, you've got the counselling. And I think that is what was really, made really clear at the fertility show. I think sometimes because we're in the surrogacy community with people who know about surrogacy, it's easy to forget actually how the general public don't know what we know, and why it's so important that we keep putting this out there.
And I think also what we found was that, can bring it back to cost. People are sort of banding around figures for a surrogacy journey that are a lot higher if you go with an agency than you don't. So people are coming up to us saying, I don't have £70,000 to go on and we're like, well, on an independent journey you wouldn't need £70,000, but you need to put in more work yourself. If you're willing to do that, you can do it on a lower budget, and we're not saying by any means cut corners because of finances, but what we're saying is tell people what the options are. And that really did shape the very first course that we offer as well. In the under the intended parent online courses, because it was like, well, hold on, let's just tell everyone every option, every cost, and everything they get out of each different avenue, and then let them decide. Because at the moment decisions are being made on the basis of, if I spend more I reduce risk more, or if I spend more I get a more likely chance of a successful outcome. And actually it's not driven by money, it's driven by how much you're going to put into this, what is your affordability, and what's going to work for you as a couple and a family, and then make your decision from that point, rather than thinking that the more money you put into it, the more likely you are to have a successful outcome. And
I think it's that need of us sort of reflecting on the landscape at the moment and thinking, do you know what, there is still very much, there isn't anywhere that you can go to get all of this information. You go to an agency, you'll find out about that agency. There are some, I know that some of the agencies will tell you a little bit about independent surrogacy, but ultimately they're an agency, and they've got a product that they are offering, and again, you feel like the Facebook groups are very, the people in the Facebook groups who are independent surrogacy are passionately independent surrogacy. So we'll tell you don't need an agency, without sort of maybe always realising that some people don't have the time to be on Facebook all the time. And some people don't, that their personality doesn't match being on Facebook all the time and talking to people that they can't see face to face. So I think that's, it was, for us, it was filling a really clear gap. of what actually needs to be out there.
Yeah, it was brilliant. So, I think we've had a couple of years of really informing ourselves, and I'm super proud of where we've landed with sort of the podcast coming out this week. It's National Surrogacy Awareness Week as well in the UK, so it's just a poignant time for us to sort of relaunch the podcast. The website's up and running, and we've got some blogs and bits and pieces up there, and then we've got our 3 wonderful courses. And I think that if you have never been in the surrogacy space before, or even if you're in a journey and in the midst of it or pregnant, there's something for you in each of them. The first one, I guess, is our sort of introduction to surrogacy, we call it, don't we? Which tells you everything about anything there is to know in the world of UK surrogacy. The second is, a guide to independent surrogacy. So if you decide to do it independently, we'll tell you everything you need to know, then link you into the communities that you'll probably want to be a part of.
I think that's been really important as well for me, is that each of these courses will have their own private communities. And because the courses are going to be online, they're going to be face-to-face with us, where we'll go through things and then give people the chance to ask questions. But because they're going to be for such a small number of people, it will give people, again, that's such an important opportunity to actually see other people that are going through this and build that connection. Because although we do have the Facebook community set up, one of the things that we spoke to with Julianne was actually how it can be very lonely as an IP, and it's very difficult to find your people, people who understand really and truly what you're going through. And sometimes in some of the bigger Facebook groups where you haven't met those people before, at the same time as them being, your people, they're also in some ways, for unmatched IPs, they're your competition.
Yeah.
And then that's a really complex relationship. And so I'm really excited about having these little course groups where, people can build that trust. People can look at each other face to face, can see what they mean when they say things, and know that is then their community. And I just think that's such an important thing, that the Facebook groups give you to a certain extent. But I think nothing beats when you've actually met somebody and you've spoken to them and you know a little bit more about them.
I think that's, and then that's sort of where we come out with course number 3, Birth and Beyond, is that actually when you come out of the other side of this journey as parents, like we said at the top of this conversation, your grief doesn't shrink, you just grow around it. And so there will be points in your time where you're triggered back to your surrogacy journey, or your child might ask you something, and to have another IP who's become a parent at a similar time, you can be like, oh my god, she came out with this today, oh my god, I had to go into school today. It's just nice. And it's also nice for our children to have one another, so that they know that birth through surrogacy isn't a total anomaly, and they can't find anyone like them, I think.
And course 3, just because we know our courses inside out, but course 3, it was our idea to do an NCT type course, but for people who specifically are having children through surrogacy. So it will prepare you for birth and beyond, and give you that community that I certainly missed when the girls were born, and had those questions like, why is she crying at 1 o'clock in the morning?
Exactly that. Should I feed her broccoli today, or all of that. I mean, I didn't let anyone feed Amala for the first 3 months of her life because I was so afraid that she wouldn't know I was her mum. So hopefully, our third course addresses all of those issues. But super proud of, over the last 2 years, the groundwork I guess we've been in, and the little humans that we've raised, and they're wonderful. It is, and I hope that all of the IPs who do listen, or even friends and family, will get something out of the next season of the podcast, and going on and joining one of the courses if it suits right for them. They do go live on the 11th of September, if I've got that date right.
The first course goes live. That's the introduction to surrogacy. So that's the basically the overview of everything you're going to need to sort of make your decisions and feel empowered to do that. And also the website is live, and the link to that should be in the blurb under the podcast, but it's also just theintendedparent.co.uk. So check
nice
that
and simple.
And subscribe to our newsletters as well. We put out a newsletter every week, just giving you a little bit update about what we're doing, who we've been chatting to, and information about the courses, further information.
It all just helps create network, doesn't it? And I think that network, you won't realise that, like we say, we're sort of years on from our surrogacy journey, and I think we're given a stark reminder that counselling is something that we could probably both still do with at this point in our journey. So it's nice to sort of keep your toe in the water a little bit, even after you've had your miracle babies. So I hope that hopefully the newsletter and the courses and the podcast help to keep everyone connected. And the podcast will drop every week from now. So do hit subscribe if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. We'd also love a lovely review if you've enjoyed listening.
Thank you. See you next week.
Much. See you later. Bye. Guys.